Well, no, I think we should go on and get started.
Yep.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome into our Bond family for the evening. Welcome to the 4th annual Bond Summit. My name is Damon Harris, and it's my job to welcome you this evening. We understand that we have some participants from around the country this evening, so we'd like to find out. So what we'd like you to do is to place a greeting from your city and state in the chat. All right. So you don't need to include your name. You can just include your city and state in the chat. I suppose we can see your name anyway, at least in your Zoom name, your Zoom alias. So just hop in the chat and type a couple of spaces to see where you are. A lot of DMV.
Yeah, Eastern Shore in the building. Got Eastern Shore, Maryland, Salisbury, Maryland. Shout out to Eastern Shore.
Yeah, a whole lot of DMV in here. Mr. Kitchen, what's going on with your Florida family, man? I don't see any no comma FLs in here.
And I'm looking for them. I'm like, y'all not representing for me. No, I retweeted, I put it on LinkedIn, Facebook. Come on, y'all.
DMV is strong in here. Oh, Guatemala, Rod Godinez. There you go, Sakani and John. I'm in Upper Marlboro too. This is the Bat Cave over there. All right, DMV is standing up. There we go, making GA. I hear you, Mr. Bostic. All right, appreciate everybody humoring us a little bit with that. So let me tell you a little bit about the Bond Project. So the Building Our Network, a diversity project, we call it the Bond Project. It works to help school districts and other organizations to recruit, retain, develop, and empower male educators of color. The research that we've done, like the stories we've heard, they've convinced us about the critical role that men of color play in the lives of all students, but particularly our young men of color. And the theory of action for the Bond Project basically boils down to 2 sentences. If schools were better places for our boys of color, then more of them would want to be teachers. And if schools were better places for our men of color, then more of them would want to stay teachers. And we at the Bond Project, we talk and we write a lot about these issues, but tonight we want to open up the conversation to you. And the Bond Summit is our annual conversation about the policy nexus between education, race, and gender. But given our current climate, we thought it'd be prudent to add 2 additional elements, which are politics and the pandemic. We're going to hear from some experts, and we're going to ask you to engage with us on Twitter using the hashtag Bond Summit. So Des, could you stick that in that hashtag in the chat? Use that hashtag Bond Summit. We'd also like you to tweet us at Bond Educators. You tweet us and your followers because we want you to be an active participant in this conversation, because this isn't meant to be a passive activity, even though it's on the webinar format. So in addition to Twitter, we're going to ask you to write any questions that you have in the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen. And what we are hopeful to do is that around 7 o'clock, we'll pause our questions and it will get your questions and we'll give them to the panelists. And with that said, I'll introduce our panelists in alphabetical order by last name. So Dr. Julius Davis is the University System of Maryland Wilson H. Elkins Associate Professor of Mathematics, Education, and the Director of the Center for Research and Mentoring of Black Male Students and Teachers at Bowie State University. He is also the coordinator of the Master of Arts in Teaching program in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Professional Development in the College of Education. Dr. Davis has 2 main strands of research focused on Black students and teachers in urban and suburban schools. His Black students research critically examines their mathematical achievement and experiences and how policies shape their mathematics education. Dr. Davis's research of Black mathematics teachers focuses on content and pedagogical knowledge and academic and professional experiences and policies that shape their praxis. His research of students and teachers primarily focuses on Black males. And Dr. Davis's research has been presented at international, national, and regional conferences. He works closely with teachers, school leaders, and other instructors in developing their dissertation research in urban and educational leadership doctoral programs. Dr. Davis also engages in professional development with teachers and school leaders across the country focused on Black males, culturally responsive leadership and pedagogy, differentiated instruction, technology integration, and STEM education. Thanks, Dr. Davis, for joining us. And Dr. Vermel Green is the chair of the Maryland State Board of Education, and she has been an educator for more than 44 years, teaching at the elementary through college levels. Dr. Green is currently an educational consultant, new teacher mentor, and conference speaker. She has conducted professional development and training workshops, as well as online classes for thousands of teachers and administrators from coast to coast. And her areas of focus include closing the gender achievement gap, educating for character, and managing classrooms effectively. When she was a middle school principal in Prince George's County Schools in Maryland, public schools in Maryland, she piloted an award-winning character education program, which was featured on local regional media. And after her retirement from Prince George's County Public Schools, Dr. Green founded Sacred Life Academy for Boys in Capitol Heights, Maryland. The school's innovative curriculum focused on building character and accommodating the academic, social, developmental, and physical needs of young boys in kindergarten through 8th grade. We hope to be joined by Council Member Will Jawando.
He has
He's
had
here. I can't see it. I didn't see him in there.
technical difficulty getting in.
Oh.
And he was, yeah, if you could change the host setting to Timmy, he would help. We'd be able to help him get in. Sorry about that interruption.
All right, Timmy, you good? So where were we? We were about to talk about Councilmember Jawando, so he'll be on here in a second. Councilmember Will Jawando was elected to an at-large county seat on the Montgomery County, Maryland County Council in 2018, and he's been working to fight for racial justice since he took office. He has been actively using this platform to push for more equal treatment for people of all backgrounds through legislation such as the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act and the Crown Act. Just this week, he introduced a resolution to declare racism as a public health emergency, and in the weeks to come, he intends to introduce additional legislation on police use of force. Councilmember Jawando grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and he attended schools in the DMV from elementary through college. After graduation, he went to work on Capitol Hill for Speaker Pelosi, Senator Brown, and then Senator Obama, before going on to work in the Obama White House and the Department of Education. Thanks, Dr. Green and Mr. Councilmember Jawando. Next up is Mr. Otis Kitchen II. Mr. Otis Kitchen II has been an elementary school educator for 17 years. He's been a teacher in Palm Beach County, Florida, and a teacher and administrator in Hillsborough County, Florida school systems. He has served as a presenter on various topics for school and community groups. He has also served as a member of several committees focused on school leadership and equity. One of his greatest passions is sharing his best practice strategies that he's researched and successfully used to solidify his philosophy that all students can excel. He is proud to be a founding member of the Black Male Leadership Initiative that has a mission to empower Black male educators in ways that elevate their knowledge and skills as they prepare to take on diverse roles across all levels of school leadership and district leadership. Thanks, Mr. Kitchen. And Mr. Diego Uriburu is originally from Argentina, and he has promoted the rights of Latino, immigrant, and LGBT communities in the Washington, D.C. area Since immigrating to the US in 1988, he co-founded Identity Incorporated, a community-based organization in Montgomery County, Maryland, and he serves as its executive director. Through his leadership and advocacy efforts and coalitions established with the local government, school government, and businesses, Mr. Uriburu has worked determinedly to improve access to educational and employment opportunities for underserved immigrant youth. His dedication to excellence has helped establish Identity as an influential and trusted community resource whose priorities are guided by research-based programs and advocacy that respond to the specific needs of the community Identity serves. And thank you to our panelists for joining. And now I'll get off the stage and turn it over to our moderator, Mr. Desmond McCall, and he'll continue the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Good evening to everyone. As Dr. Davis shared, my name is Desmond McCall, and I'm one of the Bond leadership team members and proud principal, assistant principal of Glen Haven Elementary School here in Montgomery County Public Schools. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be your moderator, and looking forward to great conversation for our 4th annual Bond Summit. It's great to see you, Mr. Jawando. Glad you were able to get in, and we're looking and excited for you to be here as well, and we're looking forward for a great conversation. For those of you who may not know, BOND stands for Building Our Network of Diversity, a group that aspires to recruit, mentor, retain, and empower male educators of color. The BOND Project values the role of male educators in our schools and support spaces to appreciate and further develop their talents. The mission is pretty simple. We want to uplift our kids, uplift our culture, and uplift our craft. Our goal this evening is to have a rich and meaningful public conversation about PPE, politics, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the state of education as we work to meet the needs of all students that we serve. The format this evening will be a discussion held amongst the panelists introduced by Dr. Harris. There will be 2 parts to tonight's discussion. Our panelists will be given a list of potential topics that we may cover for tonight. Panelists will be asked a series of questions to respond to, and I will designate one of our panelists to initiate the conversation. We're asking that the lead panelists take no more than 2 to 2.5 minutes to respond to the answer. And if other panelists would like to respond, we ask that you adhere to a 1.5 minute additive response to keep our conversation flowing. At around 7, we'll shift our attention to the chat and the open forum as we ask that our guests engage our panelists with questions that are relevant to the topic and add to the meaningful conversation we anticipate having for this evening. Now that the structure has been reviewed and laid out, let us go ahead and begin. So our first question for our panelists, I'm going to actually direct this to Mr. Kitchen. Now that the election day has come and gone, how are you feeling? How do you see yourself and your family, and what's going on nowadays? Mr. Kitchen.
First, want to thank Bond and thank everybody for this opportunity to speak. This question was right on time. I'm in Tampa, Florida. We recently had to deal with Tropical Storm Eta. We had closing the schools. We had to prepare. We had to prepare for the community. So it's constant change going on every single day. I did get an email right before this presentation that potentially one of my students was diagnosed with COVID. So what this has taught me is you have to be prepared for constant change, which is enabling me to build my tool set. So when we do eventually get past this pandemic, I'm gonna be stronger. I'm gonna be able to adapt. I'm gonna be able to handle situations when they come at a rapid pace, because this is the world we live in right now. With my family, it's been a blessing, and then it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge because I recently lost my father and some family members, but at the same time, I've been able to spend more time with family here on earth. I've been able to plan with my wife fiscally. We've been able to refinance our home. So there have been challenges as well as blessings throughout this entire process. But at the end of the day, I try to ensure that when I wake up in the morning, I'm very grateful. I list 3 things that I'm grateful for. And before I go to bed, I list 3 things that I'm grateful for. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando, How you doing, man? How are things going on your end post-election?
I'm hanging in there. I just came out of a council session, and so it all melds together for me. But I'm excited. I think I'm happy that we've chosen a new leader for the country, even though if the current leader hadn't gotten the memo yet. But that we will have a transition of power on January 20th. But the work still lies ahead, right? I mean, I think we've all seen. COVID has laid bare all of the disparities we already knew were there. The organization of Bond and all the educators and administrators here, and we knew this was here. Now the rest of the world knows it's here. And so the question is, what are we going to do about it? And we need a fundamental change in our approach to our systems. And that's everything from funding to policy to law to how we organize, our various forms of systems, obviously education, criminal justice, transportation, go down the list. And so I'm very focused. I'm hopeful. I'm glad we've taken that first step, getting past that election. But 70 million people voted to continue with the path that we were on. And so it also reminds us that we've got some work to do on the education front and on the making sure that people understand what's at stake. So I'm excited, I'm hopeful, but I'm also anxious because, we can't stop. We've got to continue. This is just the beginning. And that's certainly what I think we need to do at every level and whatever our sphere of influence is. So thank you all for having me, by the way. And I'm sorry I couldn't get on before now, but it sounds like I was almost on time. So
it happens. We appreciate you being here, council member Jawanda. We appreciate you. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Green, how are you doing? How's family? How are things going post-election? How do you see yourself and your family and what's going on nowadays? You're on mute, Dr. Green.
Thank you. I'm almost afraid to say something because I am truly an introvert. So when someone told me in March, you can't go anywhere, you have to stay home, part of me was jumping up and down saying, yes. But out of consideration for my colleagues and my neighbors who are very people-oriented, I did express my sympathies and I joined in the moan and groans. But insofar as the election, my main thoughts is that just concerned that in still getting reports of voter fraud. I'm just so concerned about this election and future elections. It is, the electoral process is the foundation of America, the foundation of our democracy. And if that becomes contaminated, especially to the extent that it appears to have been, then it degrades people's confidence that their vote matters, that their vote will be counted. So this will be a key time for our country, and looking forward to coming out on the other side. I read something that someone said they were going to really celebrate when that ball drops on 2021, and I, for one, will be.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Mr. Uruburu, I'm sorry. How about you? How are you doing? Your family, you?
Thank you. Please just call me Diego. It's easier. And,
okay, I will call you Diego. Will do.
So I ditto everything that has been said thus far. While happy, I'm also very concerned, not just about our president, who has not gotten the memo yet, but the structures of racism and inequity that pre-existed our current president are still alive and well, even in the liberal bastions such as Montgomery County and others. So as people of color, not just educators, as people of color, our fight is with the extreme right, if you will, but also within our allies who sometimes conscious or unconsciously continue to implement practice, policies, etc., that are racist and not equitable. So I'm happy but worried because our fight continues and it never stopped.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Davis, how you doing? How's family? Yourself?
Well, I'm doing much better to be here tonight. A busy day nonetheless. And I'm a father of 4. And so my time between the center work and my family work is pretty much committed. And so I'm happy to be doing well. My family's doing well. But in relation to the question that we're here, I think I'd like to build on what Diego said. I think as a Black man and knowing many communities around the country who are underserved by our government, I think that our work, both before election and after election, there's still work for us to do. We know that these political bodies have not always served our community well. And if we really look at and study our ancestors, we know that they didn't just give up and they always continued to fight past their vote. And I think that we all have to be thinking about what are our commitments and what are we willing to put work into beyond this point. A lot of times during the election time, people have conversations about holding political figures responsible, but I think as people, we have responsibilities too to do our part to do things that we think are important. I unapologetically focus my issues on Black education, Black people, because I feel like when all these things come to play, we're always the ones left behind. Anything that you find that is more problematic is plaguing our community more. Anything that is of benefit is we have less of it. And that is a function of what Mr. Diego was saying in terms of racism. Racism is alive and well, and it functions regardless of the election here or not.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. You raised an interesting point, which actually moves us right to what the second question was, specifically around work. You mentioned, we have work to do, and particularly around those political bodies and just kind of where we are as a nation, right? And how it impacts Black and Brown communities. My next question is going to be directed to Councilmember Jawando to kind of start us off, but then of course, all panelists can jump right in. Speaking of work to do, this is a very contentious time in our country. I think we can all agree. Our minds are clouded with a lot of partisan posturing. Specifically, we see it in social media. We see it blatantly, out on the streets. What advice would you give, particularly to our school-age children, because that is our focus. That's why we're here. That's what brings us here, right? And that's our work for many of us. What would be your advice for school-age children and their families as they try to navigate this, what is quasi new, but it's kind of been around for the past at least 4 to 5 years, maybe openly, but how do you express to school-age children and families how they should navigate this?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. That's something we could talk about for long. We could just talk about that the whole time.
Right.
And you were careful not to say school-age children of color. I think you left it open, I think intentionally. I think there's work to do for all of us, as we mentioned, as you did to the lead into the question. One of the things, there's individual work, right? And then there's systemic work. So let me frame it that way. And we have to be involved in both at all times. And so I would say that, and no matter how old you are. So if you're a young person, I do story times where I read when I'm the lead for libraries, like subcommittee chair for library on our education committee here in Montgomery County. And I've been doing story time since the libraries were closed in March. And I've done over 80 episodes from my couch behind me here in my office and sometimes at home. And I hosted with MCPS a discussion with Dr. Ibram Kendi for students, for elementary age students to read his new book, Anti-Racist Baby, right? Not his large books, which for adults, which are great, but to get the context and the concept of anti-racism on the table early, because racism is taught. And it's implicit and explicit. And so we read the book, then we had a discussion with the school-age children and their staff from around MCPS and their parents. And so that's an example of kind of like the individual and system work that needs to be done to understand what has happened in the history of this country and why we are where we are. And that no one is immune from it, no matter how progressive we might think we are or how red the state is. It's for go across the country, it's there. And so I think I would say educate yourself, and you're never too young to start learning. We know that kids start making differences very young, in the single digits of Black and white, and assigning value to those things, right? And Latino and et cetera. And so I think that would be one thing. Educate yourself, and you're an adult, you need to know the history of this country. You need to know that when we're talking about riots, you know, when you hear the dog whistling, or not even dog whistling, of like, you know, they're going to come take you out of the suburbs, you need to know about all the violent history that's happened here, and the riots when Blacks and others tried to integrate communities and were bombed out of their homes, and the violence of the slave patrols that are now our police department. And you need to know that. You can't appreciate what we have to do and how deep it is if you don't know that. So I would say learn your history, and there's an appropriate way to do that at every age. And then connect it to the systemic problems that we have right now, and find your way to have an impact. Not everyone's going to do the same thing. You know, Bond, you're going to have, some people are going to be educators, some people are going to be policymakers, some people are going to be advocates, some people are going to work in healthcare. There's so much work to do. Just find a space in your life and in your work where you're going to try to address and attack from an individual and systemic way this problem that is the problem of not only America, but of the world. So I would say find your place in that and continue to do that for the rest of your life. That's what I would tell young people. You're on mute. You're on mute, Principal McCall.
As you muted.
Yeah. That's the word of 2020. You're on mute.
Dr. Green, your thoughts. Sorry about that. I'm gonna leave that button alone. Dr. Green.
I think I'm probably older than most of our panelists, and perhaps many of the people in our audience as well. And for my grandchildren and even my children who are in their 40s, you know, I just tell them that much of what they're going through now, we've gone through before. I remember when I was going to have my first child, and I kept saying, oh, no one's ever done this before. And people would look at me and say, there's been a lot of women who have done that before. But I think that kind of brings everyone down to reality. And it's reassuring that there have been other tumultuous times in our country. You know, I grew up in this area. I remember the riots of 1968 and how they burned down our neighborhoods, and you know, all the turmoil that happened when Martin Luther King was assassinated. I remember at that time, we were just wringing our hands saying, oh, 1968 was terrible. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. The Vietnam War escalated. Oh, this is just so terrible. We're just going to get destroyed. This country is not going to continue. But we did. And here we are 40 years later, more than 40 years later, and we're still strong. I think it's important to just keep our parents and our children and all those who are coming through this time, to let them know that this is nothing new. We've gone through this. It's different, but it's not really new. And that has kept me grounded even.
Thank you. Mr. Kitchen.
I'm very big with students having a voice. Teachers on my campus, they know all about it. When I'm inside classrooms, they know I want to see students facilitating the discourse and initiating the conversations. That's what I'm about. So I would say building students' knowledge, even on the elementary school level, for them to first know their rights. Students have rights and they can easily Google what their rights are. They have the right to question curriculum resources. They have the right to speak up about their grades and go directly to the principal in order to ensure that what is being given is accurate. They have the right to inspect their personnel files because there are inequities going on within personnel files that students and families aren't aware of. So I say that we need to empower our students to use their voice, to be that change, to be that difference, so we can move forward as a society.
Awesome. Thank you. Lots of great points around, building knowledge, talking to our kids, learning our history, knowing that this is nothing new, but we will still continue to move forward. I thank you all for sharing. Our next question, I want to direct to Dr. Davis. As you know, Bond supports male educators of color locally, regionally, and nationally. Workforce diversity is a trendy topic, especially right now, or at least it was prior to the election. Can people in your role, how can people in your role ensure not only that it stays on the front burner and kind of in our faces as an important thing, but that policies, resources, and monitoring mechanisms provide concrete steps in the right direction?
Thank you for the question, Desmond. I think this is something that I've been investigating for quite some time now. Over the last year, I've looked more critically at what school systems are doing, specifically in the area of workforce diversity. And you see a lot written and you hear a lot said about school systems trying to diversify their teaching population. But one of the things that I've found in looking close at this work is like when you start looking at the funding and the human capital that they're devoting to actually diversifying, you see it absent. It's not there. They're giving it lip service and they're writing it down in documents and they're not doing it. I think the other thing about it that I'm finding is that this is a very political topic. While some say that they want diversity, when it comes down to real tangible plans and things that people are doing in this effort, they're not always supported by the central office administration or the board. And I think that those are two areas that make a critical decision about like how we actually approach teacher diversity. And I would even say school psychologists, school counselors, the diversity in all those spaces, because it's important that we begin to hold school district boards and school district central office who are responsible for workforce diversity accountable. We hold teachers accountable, we hold administrators accountable, but in terms of diversity, where are our mechanisms in place to ensure that those folks are accountable to achieving the goals that they set out in place that they write down in these plans? They become empty promises. And I would stop there, but those are, I think, a few things that we need to begin to do. There needs to be some accountability at the district level that if you're going to diversify, you have to show some concrete action. You have to show your funding and your human capital as to where you're doing the actual work in that area.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Any other panelists would like to respond? Okay, Mr. Diego.
So I agree 100% with Dr. Davis. I would also challenge the question. I think that the question is not what you, meaning the panelists in a position, but what do we? The fact is that what I learned is that no one will do anything for you unless you lead. So you as educators of color need to also organize and find allies. For example, Identity with the NAACP in Montgomery County created the Black and Brown Coalition. And some of our asks are aligned with your priorities. So I think that you need to organize and not wait for people from the outside to do the work for you, but to work together. So I will go from the you to the we. There are also policies, practices that maybe were implemented with good intentions and maybe not so good intentions. But when I asked Montgomery County about targets in terms of hiring teachers of color, they cannot have targets because it is against, it's almost discriminatory. But which to me is complete BS. So we need to work together. Talk about the unions, for example. Unions are controlled, the majority from white teachers, and the leaders might not have the best interests of Black and brown educators. Or they might pay lip service. So we need to organize. We cannot wait for others to change it, and we need to work together. So I would change the question from the you, what can you do, to what can we do to really change things from the root, because otherwise things do not change. And I heard Dr. Davis say twice already, having check marks and protocols and whatnot, but things don't change that way.
Mhm. Any other thoughts before we move forward?
Can I just add another thing to that? I think that we also even need to look beyond the school systems. So I know Dr. Green is on the Maryland board. I think we got to look at the state level too. I mean, many of the policies that they're putting in place, do you know how expensive it is to become a teacher, to become anybody certified in a school system? And I think that we really need to think about that. If we want to increase, why is it so expensive? For a student to become a teacher. Many of our students pay upwards of $300+ to get, is really more than that, especially with the new certification exam that they have with either EdTPA or the PPAP with ETS. I think that we need to be holding all of these folks accountable, because it's like, where is our voice for those folks who are at this level when it comes to making those decisions? To me, when I've attended board meetings and things of that nature, I've seen it. People will invite you in, they let you make your comments, but they've already made their minds up about the decision that they're gonna make. So it's really a show. They said that they gave you the opportunity to speak, but really they don't even let your voice or the things that you bring in to influence their decision. So I think that we also need to hold folks at that state level and even at the board level accountable for our input.
Yeah, I would add just briefly on that. You know, we to Mr. Davis's point, we have to pay teachers more. To the point of if you can't afford to live where you teach or to have the life that you want to have, it's just not going to work. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I just think we have to say that, and there's been steps towards that, but we're not anywhere near where we need to be as valuing the profession of education. And that would help attract, and help Black, brown teachers, educators, people aspiring to be in the field. I think you could get more people if you uplifted the whole profession. And it's not a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet on that question, but that's certainly a part of it. And if you look at our international competitors, in South Korea, teachers are paid over $100,000 a year. And in other countries like that. And I know the Kerwin Commission looked at all those models and did that, and they came back, and then the governor vetoed the bill. So that would get us on the path to raising educator salaries. And then you need to have high accountability. I agree with Diego as well. You don't just do that without, that's always been my thing, to whom much is given, much is required, but let's start giving, let's start doing what we're supposed to do.
Thank you. My next question, I'm going to move to our next question, is for Mr. Diego. As we think about the current environment, with pandemic, just kind of a state of where we are in education, how do we recruit allies and maintain our allies in this current environment, particularly as we're talking about, movement policies and things of that nature we've just been discussing? What do you think? What's your perspective?
I think that the best thing to do is really look for alignments. Who are the ones who benefit from having more better paid educators of color? I would start with the parents of our young people of color. For example, in Montgomery County, you have 54% of almost 55% of the student body is Black and brown. So working with these parents who are now the majority of the school population, to me, it's a natural allegiance between Bond and them. Also, I would find allies everywhere within like Councilmember Joando, allies in the Board of Education, but you have to have something to offer. You have to have something to offer. I, for example, don't know what if education of colors in Montgomery County have a platform or not. And I would love to find out so that we can find a way to work together with the Black and Brown Coalition. I think there's a lot of untapped potential and power that we have not unleashed, particularly within the educators. It seems to me that others speak for educators of color. I don't hear directly from educators of color. I hear directly from heads of unions, principals, but I don't hear from the educators of color directly. So I would make your voice more visible and find alignment.
Thank you. Dr. Green, your perspective, what are your thoughts on how we recruit allies and maintain them in this current environment?
I think, as it was mentioned, when we reach out to people who are like-minded, I guess having been an educator, and especially of boys, I'm always looking for allies who have a heart for where our boys lie. When I formed the task force, and I want to make a correction, I'm not the chair of the Maryland State Board of Education, far be it, I would not want that job. That's our president, Clarence Crawford. I'm the chair of a task force that was formed by the Maryland State Board of Education, and I'm a member. But as I looked for people who were going to be on that task force, I looked for people who had a heart for our boys, who really cared for our boys. So when I attended an event that was sponsored by Bowie State University, it was easy to find like-minded because that's why most of the people there were there. In fact, I think all of the people who were there had come to hear about Black educators and how to help Black boys. And so when I have Dr. Holt, Dr. Davis, Dr. Howard, who are on, and both Dr. Howards, Dr. John Howard and Dr. Daryl Howard, who are on the task force, I know that they truly are allies because they are going out of their way to help our boys and our Black boys. I think an untapped resource also out there is our mothers. Especially, again, my heart is for our Black boys. Our mothers are an untapped resource. Just like the grizzly bear is going to be protecting her cubs and she will do whatever it takes to make sure that they thrive. Same thing with our mothers. If we reach out to our mothers and form a cadre of mothers who are going to push for their sons, who are going to march on Annapolis and saying, our sons, not just our sons, but our daughters as well, we need more teachers. We need our teachers to be better paid. It'll be great if we could tap into that energy that is seething in every mother's heart.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Mr. Kitchen, the next question that we have is going to.
I wanted to, if
go
I
ahead.
can,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Especially in the year 2020, we can use and leverage social media as well as Zoom. As long as you have a mission and vision that people can connect with and your actions are aligned with that mission and vision, you can put that out there on social media. You can build a website. You can create links to where people, all they have to do is click the link through text message and put their name and phone number in it. They're aligned to your mission and vision. And you can connect with people in that capacity and be on Zoom and then start sharing commonalities to move forward.
Mm-hmm. So I hear lots of great points around forming allies, finding those of like minds, utilizing those resources, Zoom, social media, and making sure that the individuals that we're working with have the heart and like-mindedness to be able to move us in the direction that we're trying to move in. So I'm going to encourage all of us as we continue this work to make sure that we're reaching out to those allies at all levels, as was so eloquently stated by Dr. Davis. Thank you for that point, Dr. Davis. Our next question is for starting with you, Mr. Kitchen. During the summer, school districts across the nation were taking positions and outlining their intent to become anti-racist, right? The works of Ibram Kendi, is among all of us. If you're in education, you should know that author, right? We hear about D'Angelo and others who continue to write about white supremacy and that particular area of work. However, some are struggling to define what it means and outline the steps to do so. How do you define anti-racist, and what are 2 to 3 steps school districts should take to demonstrate their positions on this issue?
Well, anti-racism means challenging and disrupting systemic systems. And first, I feel like it needs to be in policy. Anti-racism needs to be in policy. There needs to be specific actions related to it. There needs to be goals set to ensure that especially Black men are getting positions within principalships and upper leadership. Also, there needs to be professional development around anti-racism, around culturally responsive curriculum resources. And then there needs to be training with those curriculum resources. And then that last piece, there needs to be an evaluation. So people are held accountable. So we've trained you, we've given you these resources. Now, these are the action steps that are going to be on a rubric that we're going to evaluate you on based off of this training that is embedded within policy.
Thank you. Dr. Davis, your thoughts?
I don't use anti-racism in my own work. There are 2 main places where I think informs my thoughts on racism. The work of the great Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, who says that if you don't understand racism, white supremacy, everything else that you think that you understand will only be confusing. And I think that her perspective of racism being a system is important. I am also the author of Critical Race Theory and Math Ed. I think critical race theory is another perspective that informs how I think about racism. And primarily because I think if you're going to do work around racism, it has to be a part of who you are naturally. I saw a post not too long ago on social media, and Principal Kafele was talking about being anti-racist. And he said, if you need a book to be anti-racist, it's a problem. There's a serious problem for us around the country. And I think that while anti-racism has been around for a long time, people have jumped on the bandwagon of it, and it has the potential to minimize the impact of racism. I've even seen empowerment of white educators around like being anti-racist and you know, it not being in a space where we can have real conversations around race and racism. I think that people want to be comfortable when they talk about racism, but as someone who grew up in Baltimore and other places and studying racism, I think that racism impacts real people, and they're still being impacted, particularly in my community. And so like, I don't think it's a laughing matter, a funny matter. I think it's something that we have to take very seriously. And I think that we have to have a very serious conversation around. And one of the reasons why I embrace critical race theory is because it recognizes that racism is endemic. It's never stopped existing. It continues to exist. And the way how racism comes about, it continues to regenerate itself in different ways. Maybe we didn't see it like we saw it with our ancestors and historically, but it still functions. And many people from my own work of doing professional development with teachers and leaders around the country, many people don't even have operational definitions of race and racism, but they've jumped on the bandwagon of anti-racism without even clear thoughts about what anti-racism is. There's a whole body of literature on anti-racism. It's not new. And so people are treating it like it's new, but they're also placing racism at an individual level. And I think I agree with Councilmember Jawando, where there are some very systematic impacts of racism that people who are saying that they're anti-racist, I don't know that they're committed to. I think one big step that we could do in school systems to say that we're anti-racist, take whiteness out the curriculum. Every subject area that there is centers white contributors, like other groups have not contributed to the knowledge base that our children should learn in schools. I think that's a major problem. And I think if you look at what McGraw-Hill did not too long ago, trying to change slavery to some kind of worker or some sort, I think that we have to be very protective of the conversations that we have about race, racism, and Black people. And so I'll pause there with my comments, but I think that racism is too serious of a conversation for us to have fuzzy conversations around.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Other thoughts?
One thing that is clear to me is that any anti-racist work needs to target a shift in power dynamics. It's a transfer of power, particularly from white to black and brown.
I would just add, I agree with that, and I appreciate the comments. You know, I introduced a resolution that has we were one of the first local counties to do it, but declaring racism a public health crisis. And it's important because, you know, you have to call out what is, right? You know, that in every system and structure, and not only does it exist, it's literally killing us. It's killing us and creating a situation, and by us, I mean Black and by extension, brown people in the caste system that we have. You need to read Isabel Wilkerson's Caste. I think she does a great job of framing racism as a example of an operation of a caste system, right? And you know, where you assign value and rank a hierarchy of people, which is what we've done. And then you give resources, to Diego's point, to some, and you deny them to others through legal means and other means, and that's what we have, and that's what we've had. And so the work of being anti-racist is dismantling that system, right? And if you want to use that term, but you can't jump to it before you understand, you know, where we are and what's happened. And so when you say racism, public health crisis, Black women, regardless of their education or amount of money, die in childbirth 4 times at the rate, right? You have the story of Serena Williams. You can't even get treatment because doctors think you can bear pain more, and they don't think you're sick, right? And we get hit by cars and trucks and buses more. 75% of the people killed by vehicles in Montgomery County as pedestrians in 2020 are Black or Latino, 75%. And that's because our communities don't have infrastructure and we don't invest in them. And so who's arrested? Obviously police violence, who's killed by police? Go down the list. Who has asthma rates because they live in environmentally degraded communities? Go down every issue, racism is tied to it. And you have to call that out, directly quantify the disparities, and then work to extricate and reallocate resources and fix those systems and laws that will lead to better outcomes. And that will require a fundamental shift in how we've done things. So yes, let's be anti-racist, but let's define what racism is. And then that is anti-racist, all the work I just described. And if you're not for that, it's much more than your individual decision to value somebody. You have to change you have to be committed to changing those systems. So I think I would just add that.
Thank you for sharing that. As we kind of really elevate the conversation around disrupting systems, I want to kind of now direct attention to the classroom, right, as we kind of think about systems. With the 1619 project being used in classrooms, you're familiar with that, and the anti-racist workshops and some of the things we've just discussed, and professional development taking place by teachers. How do you see this era of wokeness affecting teaching and the academic outcomes of Black and brown students? And that's for whoever feels led to speak.
I feel this is an opportunity to truly positively impact student achievement, because it gives students an opportunity to have a concept of the world around them, specifically Black and brown students. And if they can understand and have that concept be real to them, true, authentic history, that's only going to empower them even more towards greatness.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts?
I'll just share, just continue to build on it. I think that with the 1619, I had the privilege, and I know it's a humble privilege, to have been in Ghana for the year of return, when we thought and reflected critically about our ancestors who had to endure such enduring struggle through the Ma'afa, as Dr. Anigi calls it. And I think that having gone through the slave dungeons where our ancestors were, being in that space, feeling the emotion, I think that we have to be very critical about who's writing our history, who's funding our history, because projects like the 1619, we got to be critical, because there's even debate around like the history that's being recorded in that. And I think that as someone who embraces critical race theory, we are always looking for where the convergence of whiteness, like things don't move. Even the whole anti-racism conversation, we have to think about like where it converges to the interests of whites, because they are the ones who are in power. And I think that we have to be very mindful that when we talk about Black people, that we are protecting our own history and that we have our own scholars that we look to guide us, because there's a lot of work that young people have to go through and sort through when learning about our history that is not all accurate. And we also have to understand that the person who controls our history controls our future as well. And I think that it's also important that we don't start our history for our children in America with slavery. Our ancestors were great people before slavery. They built great civilizations before slavery. And our children must know that they're connected to that. And so I think that it's very important as we look at projects like the 1619 that they don't centralize our idea of Black history, but that we look to Africa, the continent of Africa, for the vast history that our ancestors have contributed. And I think that we also look to what our ancestors have contributed in America, even under the most enduring conditions. I live by the quote from Frederick Douglass, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do.
For our listeners, those who are here with us who may not be familiar with the 1619 Project, it's an ongoing project that was developed by the New York Times Magazine in 2019, which aimed to pretty much reframe the country's history by placing consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the U.S. national narrative. So it started as a celebration of the 400th anniversary of slavery. And so they began to take a look at, what exactly is being said about the history of our nation. And as Dr. Davis just expressed, where is this history centered? And how do we need to possibly consider realigning and readjusting that so that it's actually accurate? So I encourage those who are with us to take a look at the 1619 Project if you're not familiar with it, just to kind of give you some context on our conversation. Any other panelists who wanted to respond to that?
So I have a comment. I'm not sure about how awake we are. There's so many, again, practices, policies, structures built on the back, privileges built on the backs of Black and brown students and families, that heightened awareness, from my perspective, does not turn sometimes into better lives for our children and families. So this will be seen in history as the beginning of something that didn't happen, or it could really catch fire. And the outcome depends on all of us, on what we do at this moment in time. What are we willing to fight for how long? So I am concerned about complacency sometimes. I'm concerned about people saying, well, we've done enough, and it is in our hands, no one else's. I just want to make that point clear. It is in our hands how far and how much we want to push for.
I appreciate that.
If I could just briefly on that one, it's just such an important point. I mean, I worry, I literally lose sleep over missing the moment we're in to make significant progress. I often think, I'm gonna quote Isabel Wilkerson again, because give her credit, as I said, she talks about a lot in multiple books that she's written, Warmth of Other Suns, about the 12 and a half generations of Black people on this continent that, were born, worked to the bone, beaten, raped, died, and couldn't smell freedom. That's how long slavery existed, 225 years, 12 and a half generations. You just think about how long that is. And it shouldn't be our whole frame, but you think about what was required to persevere through that and pass the batons to successive generations so that there could be progress. And then came a generation when there was progress and emancipation did come and Reconstruction did come. And then in that same lifetime, it was all clawed back. And I think about, and so I agree with Dr. Davis that we need to teach our prehistory for sure. I mean, because, that's 500 years, but we've been here for tens of thousands. And as Black people and people of color on this, and much of that, we were living a great life and doing our thing and innovating and doing all that. We must teach that. But so to Diego's point, that baton passing, we're in a moment right now, you have them, emancipation, 13th Amendment, you can mark some of them. There's many others, Reconstruction period when we had Black senators and elected officials. We had over 2,000 state and local elected officials during the period of Reconstruction, all taken away in the South. And so I'm reminded that nothing, even gains aren't always guaranteed, right? You see it with the Voting Rights Act. And now we're in a moment where we had to watch a man be murdered for 9 minutes for people to understand that there was police violence and there was racism. Some people to wake up for the first time. And we did all the stuff and we're passing some laws. I've been pushing it here, but attention spans are short. And what will we do and how serious will it be? And will we do the deep work? I really am concerned about that. And it's something that I think we have to remember, because I sat in I'll give you one last example. I sat in a racial equity training for 2 days with the leadership of this county, good racial equity training, and talked about all this stuff, and people learned things, and I could tell they were genuine and they were learning things they didn't know. 2 days after, we come out and I'm having an argument about returning on the housing committee, returning land to a family that had owned it for 100 years, and it's the right thing to do. It's their land. We should return it to them. We shouldn't require affordable housing on it because it's their land. And I had to say, I got so frustrated. I said, who do you think gave them the land? We just learned about the Homestead Act. We just learned about all these things where certain people were given things for free or near free, and other people were denied it, namely Black people, Latinos, Asian Americans, people of, women. And now you're going to tell me with a straight face that a family that owned this land for 100 years deserves it, and we can't require anything of it now that it's public land to build, a public benefit in for affordability and other things that we know are connected to all these other issues. So the disconnect that happens in this wokeness of understanding it theoretically and even understanding the history and acknowledging it, but to what that means today, that's a gaping hole that we have to close. And I just think it's a big challenge for us. I remain hopeful, but it's a big challenge.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for contributing to that question. We'd like to welcome to the panel one of our bond members, Dr. Lorenzo Hughes. Dr. Lorenzo Hughes is a senior manager of school support and equitable practices at Anne Arundel County Public Schools. He is going to be assisting us today and sharing some of the questions that have been given to us from our guests, for our panelists. Dr. Hughes, if you could share the first question for us, and then I will ask our panelists if they could respond.
Thank you. First question. Too often politicians and educators discuss the topic of closing the achievement gaps, yet there is less talk on how we can help families access financial and mental health resources to address hunger, childcare, other needs that have a direct impact on student achievement and social emotional development. How can the school system and local government make it easier for this population to access those resources?
Dr. Green, I'm gonna ask if you could start us off.
One of the key things that has helped our people achieve what we've done up to this point is education. In the days of slavery, slaves were kept ignorant. They were not allowed to learn to read because they knew, as Frederick Douglass said, that once you learn to read, that reading is power. And so now, with so many of our children, especially our boys, not being taught the basic skills of reading, when I look at test scores as a member of the board, and I see our boys, many of them are not even proficient in the lower grades and in the upper grades in reading. So if you can't read, if you can't succeed in math and science and social studies, if you're not educated, then your hopes of achieving the kind of career path that will then lead you out of poverty, or even if you start out in middle class, keep you in middle class, or even raise you above. Education is so key. And so I think that is going to be the key to helping our children and the people of our communities to succeed.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Any other panelists who'd like to respond to that question?
ago, we all know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If our children are hungry, either afraid, either parents have died because of COVID, it's really difficult to concentrate on education. So we had to advocate for our elected officials to continue to provide the support services, at least in Montgomery County they have, and they had done a phenomenal job. So I want to applaud Councilmember Giovando and his colleagues for what they've done, because we cannot think about education the way we have historically thought about it without understanding what the main needs are right now. No, literally, people are losing their homes. They don't know where they're going to be tomorrow. They're hungry. They are studying virtually without the parents knowing how the internet works. I've seen families with 11 individuals in a 2-bedroom apartment. So how can you concentrate? Parents are afraid of telling the school system that the Chromebook broke because they think they're going to charge them for it. So there's many things that we have to go to where our community tells us to go. And then we can think about education, because that also is education. That everything is education, not just what we learn in the classroom about our history, but also about what's happening right now with their lives.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Hughes.
Can I say just briefly, because I'll be very brief.
Yes.
You can't, to Diego's point, we have to relieve pressure, and as a society, and you can't, if you're hungry, like you said, if your parents working 2-3 jobs or doesn't have a job, if you're living in dilapidated conditions, if the transportation system doesn't work, we just stack. If you can't afford childcare and you have to make tough decisions and put your kids in dangerous situations, we're not going to get better outcomes. And teachers have to deal with that. Educators have to deal with that. That they call it educational load. But the issues that are in the classroom with the kids when they get there, they're all those, and they're macroeconomic issues. We have to relieve the pressure. Health, 3 top drivers: rent or mortgage, healthcare, and childcare. 3 things. And then you get food and transportation after that. And until we have a national system of healthcare for everybody, expand, make sure people are covered, until we provide a system of childcare, it was a revolutionary thought in America to get non-landowning white people education for free, K-12. When that was done, the rest of the world was like, "What are y'all doing? Like, why are y'all doing that?" And so we have to have another revolution where we take care of basic needs so people can actually thrive.
Thank you for sharing.
If I may add one more thing, why do we think it is that Black and Brown students have lost around a year of knowledge during the first 3-4 months of the pandemic? Is it because we don't learn as well as others, or is it because of the tremendous amount of trauma that they have undergone by experiencing themselves or the family members being affected economically, mental health, affected by COVID, the anxiety of the parents of not knowing where they're going to be tomorrow, where they're going to get food tomorrow. So we need to really understand the social determinants of education. No, it's not that we did not study as hard. From my perspective, it is the tremendous social emotional overload our students of color have and continue to undergo.
Thank you. I appreciate that point. Before we move to our next question, I do want to just share with our viewers that some of our panelists may have to depart early, so I want to just make sure that we recognize and honor that. So when that is the time for you, just let us know, because I do want to make sure that we give you your opportunity to share your closing thoughts with the general public. But given that, we'll move forward. I'm not sure if anyone needed to depart at the moment, but if not, we'll move forward. Dr. Hughes, if you could move forward with our next question.
Do you think African-American celebrities and famous people of color have a responsibility to engage, empower, and educate those less fortunate so there can be better opportunity for their folks / people to gain jobs, housing, and an education in 2020, 2021?
Dr. Kitchen, your thoughts. Mr. Kitchen, I called it, I'm claiming it early for you.
Well, I definitely feel as if people should definitely use their resources to be a blessing to other people. You be a blessing to other people and you will be blessed. And it's not solely their responsibility, but I do feel as if you have the resources, you definitely should contribute to the greater good of society.
Dr. Davis, what are your thoughts on that as celebrities? Do you feel they have a responsibility to Black and Brown children?
I think we all have a responsibility. I think that they're all our children. If we embrace our historical perspective of seeing the children as a part of being in the village, they're all our responsibility. I don't think it's just famous folks. I think that they just happen to have the resources that we look to that think that we can make a greater impact. But I think that we all have. I think that there are small things that we can do on an everyday basis to impact our children. And I think that we all just have to figure out if that's our place and if we want to do that. We come from a historical legacy where folks made their commitments and they worked for it. And I completely agree with many of the panelists here that we just have to put in the work. And some of the comments that I've even seen in the chat is really about putting in the work.
Thank you. Dr. Hughes, our next question.
What can non-educators or non-parents do to positively affect our younger and youngest generations? I've volunteered to work with kids in the past, and I know that it makes a difference, but what other things can we do?
Dr. Green, would you like to share your perspective on that?
I think it's key that we educate ourselves, that our parents educate ourselves. You know, we've heard the old adage that parents are the first teachers. So I think it's important that parents begin to become more informed so they can help their children. The bright side to virtual learning is that parents are seeing firsthand just what the curricula look like. They're seeing what their children are being taught. And I think this is going to be key to parents. If they see portions of the curricula that need to be changed, for them to speak up and be vocal and let their voices be heard. This has been a marvelous opportunity for them to be able to do that, especially when it comes to parents of children with special needs. And they can see that their children may not be connecting, in some cases that they are connecting with the lessons that the teachers are sending home or broadcasting. So again, capitalize upon this time.
Other thoughts from our panelists?
I'll just say briefly, I was hoping when I could say, I always have to say anything I talk about helping our kids. And I worked in the Obama White House and helped design the My Brother's Keeper initiative for our Black boys and youth. And you have to, if you're an individual, you have to two things, but you have to do three within one. And I'll explain that. You have to mentor young people, provide your knowledge and resources to them. And I think that was embedded in the question. You have to keep yourself on track with peer support and make sure you're growing and learning. We've discussed that all night. And then you have to learn from those who have come before you. And I think all of us have to have those three types of people in our lives. And I always check myself, okay, how am I doing? Who am I mentoring? Who is holding me accountable? And who is helping me? Who's mentoring me? And if that gets out of balance or out of whack, we need to correct it. And I think we all have to constantly, and particularly for our children of color, you know, who often, I know the story of my life, I'm sure everyone on here could tell the story about the set of people, men and women, that impacted them and gave them what they needed at that time and are still giving it to them. People still giving it to you. So I just think that's something. And then all the other stuff we talk about. So that's number one, and it's 3 in 1, as I said. Number 2 is be involved in the policy discussion and the systems work that we've all been talking about. And, you know, I'm an elected official. That's my role. You're resident. Everyone has the role to hold elected officials accountable and write in and demand changes. Diego has set up with his partners, the Black and Brown Coalition, and they're driving real change. You're an educator. Everyone has a role. So individual and systems, just that's what I would say. Just keep that in mind.
Thank you for that. Dr. Hughes, would you like to share our next question?
Montgomery County Public Schools partners with Montgomery College to offer the early college program, which now offers the Associate of Arts in Teaching degree, the first 2 years of a 4-year degree. How do we encourage our high schoolers of color and parents to apply and enroll in this program?
Dr. Davis, would you like to share your thoughts on this?
I actually think that that's a really great question if we want to increase educators. I think I may have had this conversation with Dr. Green at one point, that I think that dual enrollment is going to take the place of some of our current high school-based programs like TAM, Teacher Academy of Maryland, early childhood education programs, because there's an advantage to a high school student leaving their high school with a 2-year degree and a high school diploma. And I think that once parents really catch on to this, that it's going to be the new wave for us to advance our community. And I think it's also very much more economical to go that route for our young people who we want to get an education and come out without as much debt so that they can build wealth. I think that the program, though, one of the things that I've been heavily engaged with high school students over the last several years and trying to get more of them to consider education. And one of the things that I'm finding and looking at the programming is we don't engage them enough. Some of them, we haven't asked them the question about being educators. We haven't provided special programming. And Chance Lewis, one of the well-known scholars on Black male teachers, said that we have to treat them like we treat athletes. We have to really go after them and let them know that we want them to become educators. And I think Damon's comments earlier, and Bond says this all the time, and I fully embrace that. If we look at the teacher population that we're trying to recruit and get into our schools, and we look at them as students and how they're treated, I mean, not only are they treated that way in K through 12, they're treated that way in colleges and universities too. And then we want them to come into the field of education when they're not always valued and appreciated. I think that we really have to take a strong look at the students that we have in our K through 12 settings, because that's our prime source for regenerating the population of teachers that we need. But if we don't treat them well, I think that they're not going to want to come and join this profession.
Thank you.
If I may, the Black and Brown Coalition just came out with a new ask that has to do with cultural appropriateness. And what we're basically saying is that it really doesn't matter how hard MCPS, and I'm going to use this program as an example, does to encourage youth to participate in a program like this when they're not able to reach minorities. No, they spend a lot of hours and a lot of efforts developing the program, designing it, sending email to parents, but Black and brown parents who do not read the emails, who do not understand them, then it really doesn't matter how much effort you put. So we as a system need to become more culturally appropriate. We need to understand the lived experiences of our Black and brown students and their families in order then to better attract them to the programs that we are developing for them. So again, I'm just so tired of seeing tremendous amount of efforts that are not directed to the right targets because the system does not understand, to be polite, not understand the lived experiences of our Black and brown students and their families.
Thank you for raising those points. I see the Dean of Education just made a comment in the chat, Dr. Eric Benjamin, just regarding some of the things that we're addressing. I didn't quite catch all of it there, but well, we're going to move on to our next question. Dr. Hughes.
What is currently on paper about workplace diversity that is not being implemented? Where is funding going if not going to workplace diversity? What do we need to fund to ensure workplace diversity is happening?
I'm going to open that up to our panelists, whoever feels led to speak on that.
So I would just add on to so what I've uncovered in my investigations about how school systems use their money to diversify their population. So in general, there's a pot of money that is for the recruitment budget, and it looks differently in every school district, how they use that funding. But from what I understand, the vast majority of the funding is used for one, the salaries and employees and the key events that they do for recruitment. And what school systems generally try to do, from what I understand, because the recruitment budget is not usually a healthy part of the budget, they try to go to the most high impact events and programs that they have determined to get a return on their investment. And I think from my understanding, that's where the funding is devoted to in regards to diversifying and recruiting. There's not always a lot of funding that's directed specifically towards targeted groups.
Good thoughts? All right. Seeing none, what I would like to do is just really just take a moment to kind of reflect on some of the points that were raised for this evening around politics, the COVID-19 pandemic, and education. We've spoken. We started off this evening talking about the work, right, and the need to focus in on the work, and what does that mean for us as educators, politicians, as businessmen, whatever lane we're in and we're serving to make a difference in the world of education. We need to take a look at what that means for us in this work. There needs to be a level of accountability that needs to be addressed at all those levels, right? What does that mean for us in our work to make that impact for those students that we are serving, not only here in Montgomery County, but across the United States? We talked a little bit about level, what does racism mean? What does it mean to be anti-racist? Do we really have a full understanding of what that means? And how do we, as co-conspirators, as many of us may say, go about encouraging that work in the field of education? What are those steps we need to continue to take to continue to pursue that work to make education and actually open to all students, not just certain groups of students that are being successful? Given that, what I'd like to do is provide an opportunity for our panelists before we close out, because we are near the bewitching hour, to just simply give your closing thoughts around some of the things that have been brought up, some of the questions. Maybe there were some things that you didn't get to expound upon. But particularly, I'd like for you to share with our listeners and our viewers, thoughts around the pandemic, thoughts around where we are in education, and your kind of like your last words, your words of encouragement, or just even action items or thoughts to the public as we can continue to move forward to make a difference in education. And I want to start with Dr. Vimo Green. If you could give your perspective, that would be great.
First of all, I want to thank you and the organizers of Bond for inviting me. I wish that we could talk longer, because I know there's a lot of points that we could explore even more. There are a couple of things that were said that I'm going to be taking back to our board, some issues that I think need to be addressed, especially when it comes to just what is required for our teachers, and the expense that, is incurred just to become a teacher in the state of Maryland. I think probably, I keep beating the same drum, but I'm going to beat it even more, is that we really need to help our boys. And when Dr. Daryl Howard presented to our task force today about one of the components of the Bond program is that you're going to boys in school as early as grade 4. And I think it was said that if we want to recruit more Black male teachers, we're going to have to make the experience of our Black boys in school much more positive, much more rewarding to them. And that's going to come to helping our teachers to help our boys. Our teachers need to be trained in boy-girl learning differences, how boys learn differently than girls, how they their brains process information differently than girls, how they act differently than girls, their chemical makeup is differently than girls. And that the way that we are teaching our students, in many ways, it's connecting with our girls and not so much with our boys, especially when you have a profession that's hugely female. They're connecting with our girls, but our boys are floundering. And we need to help our boys. It needs to be a more concerted effort. I'd like to see more money. I was very disappointed when Kirwan came out and it didn't address some of the achievement gaps, not just socioeconomic achievement gaps, but also, and not just racial achievement gaps, but gender achievement gaps with our boys and our girls. When I look at test scores, month after month, year after year on the board, and I keep seeing those disparities. But again, we're not going to solve it in one evening. It will take us all to continue the conversation. And again, I thank you so much for inviting me. And I am going to have to go because I have signed on to another event at 7:30 where they've asked me to talk about the boy crisis and the importance of fathers in the lives of our boys. So thank you and good evening.
We thank you, thank you, Dr. Green, and we're sure you're gonna do well in providing the knowledge at your next presentation. Thanks again. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jawando, your parting words.
I just want to say thank you, Dr. Green. Good to see you. I'd love to stay in touch with each of the panelists. And Desmond, great to see you. Thank you for the invite. I put my contact information for everybody. Please reach out. You live in Montgomery County or not, happy to be of help. We're all in this work together, is what I will say, and we all have to support one another. And these issues are not unique. There might be different nuances in our local jurisdictions, but whether, from Florida to Washington State to, to Arizona to Maryland, we are facing challenges and we need to support one another. So I could commend myself to being a support and a help to my colleagues and to anyone that needs me, obviously here in Maryland and Montgomery County. And I appreciate Bond for doing this. This is just such an important conversation. I'm glad the attendance was so good, and I hope we have given some people some nuggets to chew on so that we can go out and all do this work together. Because one thing I know is that, we can't do it alone, and we are all here for a short time. We're going to have to do as much as we can for as long as we can, then we're going to pass it on. And this helps me continue. So I want to thank you all for that, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. We appreciate you being here. Dr. Julius Davis.
I think I want to borrow from Councilman Jawando and say, I think that all of us should think about where our place is in this work at the individual and the systemic level, and continue to do the work that you think is important. And let that be your legacy. Let that be your guide.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. Mr. Diego.
Three thoughts. First, thank you, Bond, for this, and the panelists for this great, open, free discussion. Three thoughts. First, that I believe in systems theory, and the theory says that if you change one part of the system, you change the entire system. So I also feel that our efforts are very much diluted sometimes. So let's unite and focus on 1, 2, 3 issues all together, change it, and then send a powerful message that Black and Brown people of color are working together, and that we are no longer going to accept the status quo. Lastly, again, the wind, we have the wind in our back, but if we are complacent, we are screwed. And lastly, I recommend that Bond and the Black and Brown Coalition form some kind of partnership and work together on moving some agendas forward.
Awesome. We look forward to the opportunity, Mr. Diego. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Kitchen.
I wanted to definitely thank Bond for the opportunity to engage in dialogue with such wonderful people. And I want to talk about what Dr. Davis said as it relates to our roles. I want to speak specifically on my role as an elementary school principal, just to continue to use my voice to challenge systems, to use my influence to impact students, particularly Black and Brown students, even more specific, Black boys, just to give them a sense of hope and give them a sense of just encouragement. And again, I thank you all for the opportunity to have this discourse tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to just say to all of our panelists, on behalf of Bond Educators, we sincerely appreciate your dedication to education and the sectors that you work in. We appreciate you sacrificing your time and being here and providing and sharing the knowledge that you share for this evening. We want to also send, on behalf of Bond Educators, a special thank you to Montgomery College for sponsorship for this evening, providing a platform for us to host our panel discussion. Also, we'd like to thank our MCPS educator community who continues to support us. We thank you. our bond leadership team members, allies, local, regional, and nationwide guests who are committed to the academic, social, emotional well-being of all students. I think Dr. Davis started out saying this, but I want to just close with this. I think we've heard a lot this evening around the work, around PPE. I just want to close with this. Find your lane and get moving. We have a lot of work to do. So with that, on behalf of Bond Educators, we thank you. Please follow us at Bond Educators. Reach out to us, #Bond Summit on Twitter. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to additional opportunities to continue to elevate these conversations. Thank you all, and on behalf of Bond Educators, thanks and good night.